Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the Public Works Podcast. My name is Joseph Blackman. Today, usual suspect, partner in crime, Shane Silsby. Shane, give us a real quick before we dive into all this shutdown craziness. How you been doing?
I'm doing okay, Joe. Like you, I've been traveling, not as much across the country like you have, but just up and down California a little bit, and the West Coast, Seattle, LA, San Diego. So
Yeah,
putting some miles on.
sure. And if you don't know, you'll probably see some, or you probably already seen some of Shane's shows come out on the Public Works Podcast feed. Shane, how is it being a podcaster or being a host for a podcast?
It's a lot of work to which you would say, Joe, of course it is. What do you think? This is all just magic. But we're in the public realm, if you will, of the public sector agencies, public works. And so I think we're very focused on making sure we're telling the story accurately and that we're representing what people are trying to say, even if they, their sentence got a little bit out of whack or whatever. We're trying to make sure that the message is clear and accurate.
Sure.
And that takes some time sometimes in the editing.
Yeah. You were up in Seattle managing for meteors. You gave your special talk that you give. How was it received up there in Foggy City?
I think it was fine. We had a good session. It was late on the second day, and so that could be a tough time where everybody's just trying to get to dinner and all that stuff. And so I think we had a good session. We had good participation. People are interested in the topic. American Society of Civil Engineers National Conference sometimes can have sessions that are a bit technical, which are interesting, obviously.
Yeah.
But this one was more about leadership development. So the segment of people wanted to hear about that versus just some technical sessions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's do a little scene setting here. It is 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time. It is October 1st, 2025. And we have a shutdown. And then, it hits the news cycle. We've got a federal government shutdown this, shutdown that. I feel like I've been seeing this for the last so many years in my adult life. The federal government shutdown, we think it's Y2K and the whole earth is just going to open up and swallow us into it. But you wake up the next day, our iPhones still work, our Teslas still turn on and charge. Everything's the usual. Shane, can you give us the what is a federal government shutdown? And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said about a lot of things still seem like they're working. And I would just add to that for now, right? For now, because the longer the shutdown occurs, the more it can be impactful to what we rely on every day. So real quick on the shutdown, the U.S. Constitution vests Congress with the power of the purse, meaning of the three branches of government, the Department of Justice, the judicial, the administrative, which is the president, or the executive, it's the executive, and then the congressional or legislative, which is the U.S. Congress. The Constitution vests the power of the budget with Congress. They are required to approve the budget and the authority to appropriate those funds from the U.S. Treasury. And since the 1970s, that federal budget has been structured around a fiscal year, which starts October 1st and runs through September 30th. So when you said it's October 1st, we have a shutdown. The reason is we didn't have a congressional budget approved by that time. Okay, and when Congress fails to pass those required appropriations, and that's appropriating dollars from the U.S. Treasury into all the departments to be able to spend and pay for people and services and projects. When that happens, or they don't pass a continuing resolution as a stopgap, which we can talk about in a little bit, what a continuing resolution is, then federal agencies must suspend, alter, pull back on their services. And that is what's happened kind of in our latest, what we know in modern history during shutdowns. So that's called the Anti-Deficiency Act, which requires agencies to take actions if they don't have the appropriated funding coming in. So I know we'll jump into a few things a little bit more, but there are some departments that are considered more essential, and those will keep moving to some extent. And we'll talk about some challenges on what that means as people don't get paid when that happens. And then some other departments have other revenue sources or other appropriations that keep them moving without relying on the base Treasury appropriation. So I think that's the first what, right? Congress didn't approve a budget bill by both arms of the legislative branch, which is the Senate and the House. And because that didn't happen by September 30th, now these other actions take place.
Sure. I've been a part of plenty of nonprofits through my adult life, and there is a budget that's usually proposed sometime during the year. It says, hey, we need to spend $18,000 to stripe our parking lot out front. We need to spend $1,800 on the sign out front. We need to, change our toilet paper from this to that company. It's going to save us $82 a month. And this budget has to be approved. So can you give us the why this budget wasn't approved, which means it led to a federal shutdown?
Yeah, good point. And you mentioned nonprofits, local governments are the same way. They're required to have a budget to be approved, and then the city council or board of supervisors at a county, then approves the appropriations of those dollars to be allocated to departments for future spending. So in this case, it's a why. Well, there were, you can go back and look at the Public Works Podcast episode on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and we broke down all the elements of that, some of the challenges associated with that act or bill, which then got signed into law, if you will. And Medicare reductions was a big part of that. There were other things, education, a few other elements. There was some AI stuff that was in there. But probably the top line challenge out of that was reducing healthcare expenses or costs in general, but within that were the Affordable Care Act subsidies. So not a healthcare expert, you can do your own research, but when you sign up, you can do the affordable healthcare, you can have your own plan. And the subsidies provided by the federal government brought down the cost of that. So we don't have a universal national healthcare in the United States, but we have some plans and we have subsidies. And in this case, those subsidies were removed as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And in some cases, when you go back and you listen to what legislators said or congressional members said, some of them didn't realize some of what they voted on. You might have heard people say, well, I voted for it, but I didn't know that was in there, whatever the case might be. Since that happened, and since those subsidies are set to be removed later in this calendar year, within a month or so, because those were taken out with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, they're not included in the congressional budget draft bills, which were put forward to fund the government. And mostly on the Democratic side, although some Republicans, they are saying we want those subsidies replaced. And if those get replaced, then we will consider approving the budget. So that's what's happening on the Democratic side, and some Republicans. On the Republican side, they are saying, no, we had this One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We need to just work under those elements, and whatever will be, will be. Or let's just pass what's called a clean resolution. We talked about that, or sorry, a continuing resolution. There's two things, a continuing resolution and a continuing resolution that's called a clean version. But in effect, the continuing resolution is taking where we were at before the budget process started and just moving that through. The way programs are funded, the levels of that, things like that. And so that's one of the proposals. And I think the Senate has taken 10 votes on that as of today of different elements, and have not come to resolution for a few different issues that I think we'll talk about next.
I would say these budget items, is there something that the general public can do to make sure there's not another federal government shutdown? Because, and we'll talk about what the implications are of a federal government shutdown, but I'm sure it's not beneficial for us as a country to have our government, kind of standing by, waiting in the wings. So what is, as a city constituent, a person of the United States, what can we do to help alleviate this or make sure it doesn't happen in the future? Or is it all out of our hands?
Well, there's two things. One is you can contact your congressional members directly. I think findyourlegislator.com or findyourlegislator.gov or .org. And then you type in your address and it tells you who your legislators are, and you can send them an email or call their office, which I recommend. With whatever position you have, you should provide feedback and advocate. And then the second thing is you can vote, right? And so we have midterm elections coming up, and depending on your feelings on these items, you can speak to that with your vote. There are a few elections that, well, one that has taken place, we have a few vacancies which will be filled by the end of the year, and we'll talk about that, I think, in a minute, how that affects the numbers in the House. But when you call your legislative office, just be clear about it. Just say, hey, these are the things that are important to me. I'd like you to move in this direction, or get feedback on why that's a challenge. And I think, for example, the healthcare subsidies, I think it's 15 million Americans that affects. And these are American citizens. The statutes do not allow for healthcare to be provided to people that are not American citizens. That's been a talking point in the news, but the fact is you don't get healthcare unless you're an American citizen through these programs. So the lack of subsidies are affecting 15 million Americans is the estimate. And those 15 million people live in all different kinds of states, right? Red states, blue states, and likely in this case, the red states are actually have just as much of an impact because of rural communities, people that might make less money on average. So they should be calling. If you live in a city, you should be calling, whatever it is, to voice your opinion.
And I thank you for skillfully articulating in this without being partisan. It's so hard to talk about this without having a side of the fence that you're aiming from. So I appreciate that. So we talked about what caused it to shut down. I mean, it's October the 17th right now, so it's been 17 days since October 1. What's keeping it shut down? Usually when somebody doesn't have money, you figure out, hey, we got to figure out how to get this thing paid for, or there's enough people, squeaky wheel saying, hey, can you guys figure it out so we can move forward? So what's keeping it shut down right now?
Yeah, I appreciate your comment about, we're not trying to be partisan. We're just trying to highlight what's happening and how that's going to affect local governments and public works industries. But there are partisan politics which are creating the issue and keeping it shut down. So I think it's fair to talk about what those things are. And if you just look at it from a Democrat and Republican standpoint, the Senate is in DC right now. The House is in recess. So let's just start there. The Senate needs 60 votes of 100. There are 100 senators. They need 60 votes to avoid what's called a filibuster. And a filibuster.
Explain that term. Yeah.
Filibuster. We might even have a slide on this we could run through, but it's basically, and this goes all the way back to the founding fathers or whatever, where without a super majority, 60, senators can speak, and they could speak for up to, I can't remember the number of hours, 48 hours, 60 hours, whatever it is, to delay the vote. Well, in modern times, we don't require the senators to actually speak for that long unless they want to. They just invoke, we would do this unless you all, you want us to speak for 60 hours, we can do that. Or we can just agree, you don't have the votes. Let's keep working on this together until we get people to shift. So right now, I think the breakdown is the Republicans have like 53 votes and the Democrats have 47 votes. And so until you get to 60, you can't avoid the filibuster that delays the vote or doesn't allow a vote to be passed. And the goal here now on the Senate side is to get people to shift position one way or another, right? You either get them to shift from 53, you need 7 more people to get to 60, or you change what they're seeing, right? The proposal, you change that to try to reestablish the vote. So that's what's happening.
How does that normally happen? For those who don't know, is it taking them out to lunch and saying, hey man, here's my viewpoints on X, Y, and Z, can we meet in the middle? Or is it like, hey, I think you're wrong in this regard. Here's why I think you're wrong. Do you want to at least concede this so we can take that, and I'll concede this so you can have that? What does that that back and forth look like to get 7 human beings who are set in their ways to change their thought process on a certain thing?
It's a great question. Probably a lot of answers to that. The number one way that it should be influenced is by people calling their congressional offices and voicing their opinions. The congressional members are there as representatives of the people in their districts. So if the people in their districts call and say, this is my position, I'm asking you to do this, and enough people call on that, a senator or a House member, they should be willing to shift their position on something, as long as it doesn't affect the safety issue or whatever the case might be. I think the nuance here is that the executive branch of the government has taken a more active role in influencing what happens here. And that creates challenges because it's creating winners and losers instead of a funded budget versus an unfunded budget.
Totally. Anything else that's keeping it from being resolved? Any other things that you might see?
Yeah, there's one that, excuse me, is even a little bit more political, and that's on the House side. So in Congress, you have the senators, which we just talked about, the Senate, and then you have the House of Representatives. And I don't know, Joe, if you're able to pull up that slide on the House of Representatives. It's going to be the one with 435 representatives to explain kind of what's happening in this realm. And on the House side, there are more representatives from, let's just say, the Republican side that are supporting funding these subsidies for the healthcare shortage. And that's because their constituents are experiencing this. Yeah, so this is the graphic. So you have 219 Republicans and 213 Democrats. If you divide 435 in half, you get 217.5. So you need 218 votes to move something through with a majority. Okay. Well, right now, some of the Republicans of that 219 are siding with the Democratic position of, and it shouldn't really be a Democratic position, just an American position of, we want people to have their healthcare subsidies retained because they've had them for the last few years, right? And they're not getting something new; they're actually losing something they had already. So some of the red dots, if you will, have moved to the left on this issue to support their constituents to get healthcare. The other thing, so that's just on its basis. So you don't have 218 on either issue. The other thing that's happening are the 3 gray dots in the middle. Those are 3 vacant seats. And we have those positioned kind of there because I think the next slide talks about each of these vacancies, but that creates a whole nother political issue. So if you just go down here, you have the 7th district in Arizona, which has already been, there's already been that election. Adelita Grijalva already won her seat as a Democrat, but she's not sworn in, and she can't be sworn in until the House comes back into session. And I'll explain that in a second. So that's a Democratic seat, which that gray dot would then change to blue. And again, and then later on this year, in November 4th, you have another election, potentially Democratic, and then you have Tennessee, another election, which is potentially Republican. So these are outstanding. The challenge is, okay, so that's what's happening with the breakup, right? You haven't got to 218 on either side. So why doesn't the House come back in session to talk about this and try to create their own solutions or whatever the case might be?
Yeah, this recess is at an inopportune time for sure.
Right. So the House is in recess. So the Senate's in DC, the House is in recess, meaning they're not in DC, and the Speaker of the House has kept them in recess because if they come back into session, they'll have to swear in that new representative from Arizona, which is going to take a gray dot and change it to blue. Okay.
Oh.
The other piece of that And that on its own, just on its own, doesn't really affect the balance of power. But the other thing that is, the other thing that's on the table here is, and I hate to even say it on our show, but it's the Epstein files. And that,
Yeah.
that representative has through her campaign speeches said she will support the resolution to release the Epstein files. And because of the people, it doesn't line up right on party line. There are Republicans, some Republicans in favor of that. So they have basically 217 votes to do that. And if she comes in and gets sworn in, she will be the 218th vote to release those files, right? And to approve a bill to ask for the release of those files. Remember what we said, it's 217 and a half, you split in the middle, you need 218.
218, yeah.
She would be the 218th vote. So,
and people are against the release of the Epstein files.
Well, 207, 217-ish people right now. So
interesting. Yeah.
I don't even want to bring that up other than to explain the context of why they're delayed in their coming back into session because of another political issue, which has nothing to do with the budget, but there you have it. So that's what's keeping it shut down, is really the Senate side can't come to resolution. The House is not being brought back into session to provide additional proposals for the Senate to consider. And both sides need to agree, right? Both parts of that branch need to agree. So that's why it's still shut down in general.
Okay. The did you want to tack any of these? Yeah. So next, the implications. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and I think on the earlier slide, just to confirm how much those federal subsidies are for healthcare, right here. So, about $14 billion. And when you look at the entire budget, multiple trillion of dollars. I haven't done the percentage yet, but the range was somewhere between, I heard 15 million to 22 million people, and it's a range of about 14 to 15 billion in costs in the budget.
Yeah, talk to us before we get into the implications of local government. What federal, or I guess what entities are shut down through the federal government being shut down that people might not know of? I think a lot of us know like TSA, maybe the post office, but like what are the implications on the federal side that might impact a citizen of the US before we get into the local government side?
Yeah, that's a great way to go next. Like, what does this all mean, right? In reality. So the slide you had up on economic impacts, I think is maybe a good place to start right here. So in addition to what people won't receive eventually in healthcare, these are the estimated gross domestic product losses. In this number ranges, I've heard 400 million a day by the Congressional Budget Office. I've heard this $15 billion a week from Treasury. So the bottom line is it hurts the economy the longer we're shut down. That's the first thing. And the challenge is that's like a broad concept, right? The economy, all right? That's kind of broad. But when we get a little bit more specific, we see other impacts here: airlines, tourism, small businesses don't get their support. And then federal workers are furloughed. So the numbers can be pretty extreme here, or unpaid, or targeted for layoffs. And then, of course, we've heard in the news about the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? That was a big news point about that person getting released. So you're not getting any of that data to help understand what's happening in the economy as an impact to all this. So as we move on to the next slides, we'll see the actual ones. I've just kind of done a thumbs up and thumbs down here. So these are the agencies that will continue operations according to some statutes. So we'll still have defense. Department of Homeland Security is DHS, and the Transportation Security Agency, which are the folks you see when you go to fly, right? The TSA agents.
Yeah.
The United States Postal Service has a different funding source, which was converted from a general fund taxation source to more of a private source. So now, because they have their own funding, they will continue. Social Security Administration and the medical services, basically the Medicaid arm, they will offer benefit payments and reimbursements, but they're reduced. They have some operations, but there are some impacts there, but they'll continue to make payments under the prior budgets. And then NASA, just in case you wanted to know, Joe, NASA for your next trip to the International Space Station, that is still maintained at this point. So that's what's going on. What I should say about that, though, is that they are not getting paid. So they're required to continue operations, but they're not getting paid.
Furloughed, so to say.
Furlough, or just they're working without pay, which is different than a furlough. Furlough is you're not working, you're not getting paid. They are working without getting paid. And that's an issue which we can talk about in a second. The next group, these are the ones that are pretty much closed or shut down, right? The Environmental Protection Agency. So any permitting that needs to go on with operations, industrial, manufacturing, all that stuff, that's shut. Housing, Urban Development, which deals with grants. They have other oversight functions for housing in the country. Small Business Administration, may be self-evident that you're not going to get any loans or support for your small businesses if that's not in place. Department of Education, right? Some student aid, but any grants will be delayed. And then the National Institute of Health and the Center for Disease Control, all that stuff related to public health tracking and what's happening with like your, in your drug fields or in your disease. If there was another breakout, for example, of a pandemic, don't want to put that into the world, but you don't have your Center for Disease Control operating, right? So they're effectively shut down. And the challenge we're seeing, like, for example, in the air traffic controller side under some operations, because we have limited operations for like U.S. Department of Transportation, which has the Federal Aviation Administration, things like that. There's limitation about 50 to 60%, I think, operating. But air traffic controllers, for example, are a group that are required to continue operations. But what we're seeing with some impacts to air traffic control across the country is flights delayed or canceled, or airports shut down in some cases because they don't have enough air traffic controllers. And, there was already a deficiency going in. There wasn't a lot of funding put toward that or to update those facilities, to automate those. So you're relying on those people. And if they are gone for whatever reason, they're sick or they need a vacation or whatever because it's a high stress job, they're not there, you don't have a way to replace them. And then what we're seeing, and this is anecdotal, I haven't seen direct data on this, but these are the stories we're hearing, is that because those air traffic controllers are not getting paid, some are having to make a decision to either take vacation or call in or log in sick time for their job as air traffic controller to go work a second job because they're not getting paid. So that could be the one thing, in my opinion, moving towards opinion on what comes next. My opinion is the air traffic controllers are really in control of the shutdown, because that's one thing that will affect all constituents effectively, because congressional members have to generally fly to and from Washington, D.C. So if they can't get home or they can't get to their job, that's a challenge.
That's the thorn in their side to say, hey, let's figure this back out. Like let's all get back to work and come up with a resolve. I mean, I could see if CDC is not around and there's no like big pandemic, who cares? Or not who cares, but it's less of a
until something happens, maybe you can gamble a little bit, right?
Yeah. I mean, education, student aid is limited. That's a thing. But I doubt people who are getting limited by student aid are actually on Capitol Hill, part of the House of Congress. So, no, it's interesting the way you make it hit home for some people as an incentive to find a resolve or resolution.
And it's funny. My understanding is, student groups, student populations don't really vote at that high of a level. So maybe they should consider a different approach next time.
That is true.
Go ahead. So here's your agency by agency status. We just went through most of this. I think that covers it. Yeah, pretty much. Mhm. So here's what we're trying to figure out, right? Looking ahead. We have an impasse. What breaks that, right? Is it the air traffic controllers? Is it constituents
Mm.
calling in? Is it somebody trying to just make a deal? Partial appropriations becomes a challenge because that it comes down to trust. So, you know, if we're at a disagreement, Joe, and then I say, well, let's meet halfway, and I'll help you with the rest later. But we don't have relationships to start with. You might say, well, I don't trust you now, and why would I trust you
Yeah.
to do something different later after I've given up my negotiating position, right?
Yeah.
So that's the challenge on partial. As we said here, public pressure is increasing, but we're not getting movement from Congress and no timeline yet. So we're already in the fourth longest shutdown in the history of the country.
Oh, wow.
And whatever date it is in October, you just know that's how many days we've been shut down if you're keeping track at home.
Sure. Let's talk now the implications of the of local government. What's
Yeah.
happening to 30,000 population city public works department down the road? Let's bring it home for everybody.
Yeah. So a couple things. One is you're not going to likely get new formulaic dollars from the agencies that would flow through every year until you get a budget. The budget puts into place appropriations. Then you get your formulaic allocations to your departments of transportation, for example, based on your population of your state. So that's going to be delayed, but that comes in a chunk or whatever the case might be. At the state level, the things that are going to affect local governments are discretionary grants. So when you submit for a federal grant, you submit to a specific agency. If that agency is not funded or they're not open, for example, they're not going to have money toward your grant, or they're not going to have the people to process the paperwork, if you will, to actually, you can have the money, but if there's no people to move it, that's not going to happen either. And then the other thing that's affecting local governments is the lack of the ability to fund congressionally directed spending requests, which we call earmarks. And those are dollars that come from Congress directly to a local agency for a specific project. So it doesn't go through all of the departments and all that stuff. That's directly from Congress, effectively to an agency. And those are part of a new budget. And if the budget's not approved, those are not being considered. If a continuing resolution gets approved, just take what we did before and move it over and then have discussions later. Those earmarks are not going to be part of that either, because those are additive each year on the budget. So that affects your local agencies. Anything that a local agency needs to work with a federal partner on for project, advancing a project. So think about the Army Corps of Engineers, think about the U.S. Department of Transportation for your highway system. You can think about the Federal Aviation Administration and what's happening in airports. So local governments don't necessarily have a federal partner because they're either not active or they're not funded, even though they have a federal nexus, meaning they have to work with them. So anything that requires a NEPA, which is the environmental permitting element, those agencies effectively are shut down. So all of the local projects that have any type of a federal nexus, like they're federally funded or they have a federal approval necessary, they're challenged. So I have a number of clients that either have funding they're trying to receive that they've been awarded, or funding they hope to receive, and federal agency actions required for that, they're all on hold right now. Right? So what does that mean? Well, you're not getting your project or design or construction of the project that's important for your community. But the other thing that's happening is I just did an analysis for one of my clients on the construction cost index increase. And so in California, year over year, that's averaging about 5.5%.
Explain.
So the cost of the materials for your project, right,
5.5%.
are going up by 5.5% minimum every year.
Gotcha.
your project didn't get bigger, the cost of the same thing got bigger, right?
Yeah.
The money you might have received from the federal government actually loses its value
Yep.
because, the money came in here, but the cost of the project went up.
Yep.
So that's the other challenge for local agencies is when you sign up for a grant agreement or whatever the case may be, and you have a match, the federal share is usually locked. So if the project cost goes up, then the local government has to fill in all those gaps, which means more of your tax dollars for your community has to be used to deliver that same project.
Gotcha. Okay. What are some things people can do to kind of, I guess, get ahead of it, or even help present it to their constituents and say, hey, federal government's doing X, Y, and Z. We're your local public works department. Continue to have patience and continue to have faith in us.
Great question. I mean, there are a lot of things that are easy to say, hard to do. One is to use an alternate funding source, right? But that presumes you have local funding sources that you can draw on. One option might be to bond for that, use external financing to get a bond, because some government agencies are getting decent rates on those bonds right now. And in one agency I worked with had a rate for their bonds that was less than the cost of inflation. So it was good for them to do more projects with that money. So you have to pay that back with interest. That's the negative. But the positive is you could potentially advance your project and avoid some of those cost increases based on time by delivering it sooner. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is try to educate your populace on what's happening and why a project is stalled, and just be transparent about, we're handcuffed in what we're able to do. So we invite you to, again, call your Congress member and voice your concerns if you think this is not headed in the right direction. So no easy answers, but that's what you could do.
Sure. All right. Well, what did we miss? What didn't we talk about the federal shutdown? Any final words?
I think that's, the high level, unless there's something, Joe, that you've been hearing in your world and in your travels, and somebody says, hey, this is the thing. And,
No, I mean, when I'm on the doom scrolling on social media, you see things like TSA shut down. People are sitting at the airport. You hear about the FAA, whether you're a traffic control, these people are having to find other jobs, other ways to make money. And what that does is it creates a resentment for that industry. And it also creates a way for you to say, oh, I can make X amount of same amount of dollars elsewhere. Why even go back to that when, every other time around the government's going to be shut down and I have to deal with it. So it's a shakeup. I mean, you know how it is when the apples that are dying or dead, they're going to fall off the tree when it gets shaken. So I think that's what's happening. And I like, even to try to answer the question I asked of like how is public works department can better craft this message to their city constituents. I don't know if there's a good way. I mean, a lot of people, when they hear government shutdown, they think, hey, am I going to have water? Am I going to have power? Am I going to is the fire truck going to come and help? And a lot of people don't know that, like, the difference between federal and local and stuff like that. But I do think if you can just reassure your people that, hey, we're still operational. You turn that spigot, you're going to have water. You flush that toilet, it's going to go bye-bye. I think that's what you could do to help keep that, the tempers from flailing.
Yeah, I think the impacts are going to be felt most in areas that are probably more rural and don't have as much industry to support their tax base. On the coast or in other metropolitan areas where you have enough other sources of revenue coming in, sales tax or whatever, to fund things locally or some operations locally, you're less reliant on a federal source. However, the asterisk to that is if you have something that's beyond the ability for your agency to handle, like a natural disaster or of a national level, right? Declared emergencies, that's where FEMA, is supposed to come in. The federal government's supposed to come in to help. If you need the Army Corps of Engineers, and they're shut down, that's where it really will become impactful if we have something like that. So we're rolling the dice right now. We're gambling, right? And as long as it's sunny skies. I know you're always going to have sunny skies in Phoenix and area, but
Oh, yeah.
effectively, I know you're getting into monsoon season, but that's the issue. And then the other thing impacts long-term. Think about if you're losing federal employees. So even if the longer the shutdown goes, the more federal employees you're likely to lose. They'll continue to be furloughed. There's been talk about layoffs. Even if you fund it now, the startup is much more difficult, or you don't have the same capacity you even had before. So those are some of the challenges. Yeah.
Sure. Well, Shane, as usual, thanks for hopping on. Thanks for chatting about this federal government. And everybody, thanks for listening to the Public Works Podcast. Put your questions and comments below, and we'll be happy to get them on our next show.
Yeah, I agree. Like, subscribe, share through LinkedIn, through YouTube, right? We're trying to put out some good content there. So see you on that side.
All right. This has been the Public Works Podcast, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in.